You dumb, beautiful fucker.
Who wants to be in America's slash fic with Abraham Lincoln?
Louisiana Purchase, that's a name.
You need to really get off my balls, okay? I'm gonna kick your ass.
Also, why was Michelangelo so stinky? Ew.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special episode of All You Can Hear. I'll be your host today, Patrick, and joining me today, I have a very special guest from the Saved by the Belial podcast. It's David. How are you today, David?
Well, I'm flattered that I am a special guest, so yeah, I'm doing great. I appreciate that.
At any time we wouldn't really wanted to sort of to branch out and talk with other shows, and I'm really glad that you're generous enough to take us up on the offer, and I'm glad you can join us today. I did want to mention that this is a special episode. We're talking about one of my favorite things. You've heard it on the show a few times, and that's tokusatsu. This broad idea of Japanese superheroes, special effects, a huge encompassing genre. And today we sort of focusing on a mutual interest for both parties, and that's Ultraman. And David, if you would, please explain to the audience, like, what is your show about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are Saved by the Belial, an Atrocious Ultraman podcast, which, you know, in retrospect, most people are going to read it as an Atrocious Ultraman podcast. And it's like, why would you call your show Atrocious? But for people who haven't watched it, there's a character that is called Belial Atrocious, and that's how they pronounce it as the Japanese to English translation. But anyway, we're a podcast that is going through various Ultraman shows. We go like the older era, which would be called the Showa era. That's like in the 60s and 70s. And we're doing some of those. And then we'll bounce over to more of the modern contemporary shows. But our focus is, instead of spending an entire podcast episode talking about an entire series, or maybe we only spend, like we spend an hour talking about a single episode, which seems like overkill. What we're doing is we take 3 minutes to discuss an episode at a time, because in Ultraman, the majority of the giants of light, so to speak, they have this thing called a color timer, and it typically lasts 3 minutes. Once the 3 minutes is out, the Ultraman dies. So that's kind of our goal, is just to keep things rolling, and half the time we don't even really talk about important stuff. We just get on weird tangents, and by the end of it, we're like, oh, we probably should have talked about the episode. But it's working out pretty well, so we're happy with the turnout so far.
Well, good, because I've definitely been listening to your show over the last several weeks, and I really do enjoy it. You and your co-host have a great rapport. It's friendly and light, and I love the gimmick, because with a lot of sort of genre shows or like niche interests, you have one host who's more versed in the subject, and you have one host that's a little bit more new to the field, and y'all have that sort of setups in a certain regard, but hinging your show around Ultraman's ability to fight within the confines of 3 minutes, I think that's a great gimmick, and sort of allows you to go through a larger number of episodes, even if you don't quite get to everything. I think like that's a really interesting concept to build your show around.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, with our last show, when we focused on Godzilla, that kind of was our shtick, so to speak, because I didn't realize that was a thing. Like, we're just like, I don't actually really listen to a lot of podcasts. But I know that sounds horrible, right? Hey, I do a podcast. I don't listen to them. It's just to be honest, like I don't have a long commute. So I'm one of those people, like, if I want to listen to something, I want it to be in one sitting. But anyway, with our last podcast, I had no idea people did that. And what's funny is some of our best friends in like the podcasting world, they started their podcast the same day as our old one did. They're still going. It's Monsters vs. Men, but they did the same thing, right? And eventually they outgrew that, because they're like, okay, we can be better than that, or just kind of realizing that's it's a way to limit yourself, I think. But yeah, I mean, that is how we started, and we just realized, like, yeah, it's just there's so much more you can do if you go outside of that. I'm the teacher and you're the student kind of it's jokey mentality, but that's really how it comes off because eventually you're going to kind of meet up in the middle. And at that point, that gimmick falls away, I think.
And it's just sort of two people talking, and there's
Exactly.
nothing wrong with that format. I
Oh,
just know
not at all.
that's just a very common way for people to structure their shows around
Yeah.
a very specific subject that a lot of people may not be as informed about.
Yeah, I had no idea.
But speaking of being informed, I was wondering, for myself and for the people listening, what specifically about Ultraman made you want to devote a show to it? Because I know with your previous show, you talked about Godzilla and explaining things behind it. But of all the Toku franchises out there, what made you decide to go with Ultraman?
Great question. So I think, like a lot of people, I really didn't get into Ultraman heavily until Ultraman Z. So I knew what it was. I mean, even growing up, God, I can't remember the American version of Gridman as like Super Samurai Cyber Squad or whatever. Yeah, I think that's right. It's like I remember that growing up. I'm actually pretty sure I had a toy or two, but I had no idea really what it was. I just knew it was like Power Rangers, right? But like, so I always had some kind of idea who Ultraman was. I remember seeing Ultraman Tiga on TV. The Mill Creek releases came out in 19, and I'm like, okay, EG Subaraya, like, let's check it out. And I remember being intrigued by Ultra Q, but just nothing really clicked at the time. And then Ultraman Z came out, and I saw a preview for it. I'm like, oh man, this looks incredible. Like, where has this been? Because like I at that point, like I loved tokusatsu, but like it was all movies at that point, and I wasn't really interested in Kamen Rider. I wasn't really interested in Sentai. So I was like, okay, let's finally give this a shot. So as I started watching Ultraman Z and getting into these other series, I think the thing that I really connected with and why I wanted to do a show about it is when you go back to the original with not so much, Ultra Q, even though it's a phenomenal show, but when you go back to the original Ultraman, E.G. Subaraya being a converted Catholic, there's just such a sense of hope and compassion and this idea of like the brotherhood of man that was very present in other tokusatsu movies at the time under the Toho banner, like what Ishiro Honda and some of these other directors and writers would do. So it's just a show that, like, yes, it's about monsters and science patrols and explosions, but underlying it is this idea of like, what could we be? Like, what could this world look like if we wanted to be better, right? If we extended compassion to people, if maybe we thought about the consequences of these decisions we were making. It was just a very smart show. And I found myself compelled in a way that nothing against Godzilla, like there's some really great films in there. But the thing I noticed is up until the 70s, you had a very intentional, like countercultural message in a lot of those movies. And then once we hit the 90s and the 2000s, you really lost a lot of that, which they're fun movies. It's just, I like to do these kind of deep, more, I like to think about themes and ideas. And I found like Ultraman's just this trove of treasures, so to speak. Whereas with Godzilla, I was like, man, I'm getting burned out. Like I knew what was coming with the 90s. And I'm like, Chris, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, that is a subject I want to get back to in a moment. But as for the Ultraman, I will echo your idea because, like you, I was aware of Ultraman for several years because, like, when you get into Toku, you sort of bombarded with a lot of different, like, properties and characters. And over time, certain ones start to look familiar. And Ultraman was the last one that I really was able to latch onto because I started with Sentai, went through it, then Rider, and now with Ultra and Ultraman Z or Z, depending on how you say it. It was the first one I was able to watch from start to finish because Subaraya Production was able to put all that for free on YouTube. But you can go right now, everybody, and watch it. It's phenomenal. The whole
you don't need
season.
to know anything about Ultraman and you can love it. I mean, that is the one thing about Ultraman shows that I love. Like, if you know the lore and the mythos, you're really going to appreciate it. But they do a really good job of not like overcomplicating things.
Definitely. I mean, I do appreciate how there's like an intense level of lore and detail for those who are looking for it. but you can hop right in and still feel like, oh, you're not really missing anything. And I love Zet, and as I'm used to calling it, because and plus I just sort of like this sort of the Japanese pronunciation of English word. It's just sort of a kind of funny to me. But I love the series, and there is sort of like this overall message of hope. Like, what could we be if we put aside our differences and work together? And like in Japan, where you have like the sort of the national mindset of like the group versus the individual.
Yeah.
I feel like there is like a stronger sense of sort of communal unity in certain regards.
Oh, absolutely.
That definitely comes through with Ultraman. It's like this big push for like positivity and unity, even though of course it is like it's through the focus of or POV of one particular character. You always have like a bigger team that the Ultra works with, like they're whatever the requisite seasons, like science crew or like home base team is. There's always a group of individuals working alongside the Ultra for the season.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not something that's unique to Ultraman. I know you weren't saying that, but it is definitely something that I'm not like a anti-American kind of person, but like individualism is a very present thing in our country and our sphere part of the world, right? Whereas, in Japan and these other cultures, it's more communal and community based where, I mean, even the idea of like moving away from family is a big deal. Whereas here in the States, I mean, it's not uncommon like, I did it several times growing up. I moved away, moved on my own. And, it's just, it's a different mindset. It's not inherently one's better than the other necessarily. I have my thoughts, but like, yeah, it's definitely, you can tell in these shows, there's more of a, how can we work together as a team and not necessarily, like, Ultraman's trying to steal the glory, or the Science Patrol, they're trying to do it on their own. They learn like, hey, we could work together, and it's all about protecting the world rather than gaining this fame and, being a superhero and the way that we see it.
I do appreciate the sort of the different interpretations of superhero East versus West, and I do love how, of course, you have one character turn into a giant battler and fights monsters, but it doesn't just diminish the efforts of like the civilian crew who use science, technology, and their other skills to sort of complement the main character, and I always appreciate that. Different seasons do it in different ways and to different effect, but that is a version of a team effort through the lens of Ultraman that I always appreciated, even from just a few series that I've gotten to see.
Yeah.
And well, speaking of the series, we both talked about watching Ultraman Z. But what are some of the other Ultra series that you have gotten to watch so far?
Ooh, okay. So I should have had that pulled up. So pretty much everything that's been released by Mill Creek at this point, I've seen. So let's see if I can go off in memory here. So we've got Ultraman, which is obviously the original. But before that, you have Ultra Q, which did not have an Ultraman. So it was more of kind of like a Twilight Zone kind of serialized. I don't really know. Like some people relate it to X-Files. I don't think that's as accurate. But it's black and white. You just have a trio of characters that go around and investigate why monsters are appearing and all this different stuff. It's just very well written. Some very prominent Japanese movie and TV actors and actresses at that point. But that's what jump started the Ultra series, right? So Ultra Q, Ultraman, then you have Ultra 7, and then you have Return of Ultraman, which is actually not the same Ultraman. It's kind of confusing if you just go by the title. And then after that, here's a few that I haven't seen. So there's Ultraman Ace, and then there's Ultraman Taro and Ultraman Leo. So those all came out here pretty recently. I was going to start watching them, but then I was like, I'll just wait for the podcast to do that. But once we jump into the current era, so I've watched a little bit of Ultraman Tiga. I'm about halfway through, and I was really excited to see they're going to release that here in, I believe, October, along with Dinah in November and then Gaia in December. Ultraman Mabius and Ultraman Nexus, those were both in the 2000s, both wonderful shows. I've seen Ultra 7X, I've seen Neo Ultra Q, and then in the new generation era, there's Ultraman Ginga, Ultraman Ginga S. Then you have Ultraman X, Ultraman Orb, Orb Origins. Then you have Ultraman Rube. It's R/B, or as Chris calls it, Ultraman R&B. And then
Yeah.
Ultraman Taiga, and then Ultraman Z, and now we're at Ultraman Trigger. I think I hit all of them.
Yeah, it's if it seems like a lot, it's because it is, because recently this year, a few weeks ago, past this recording, was the 55th anniversary celebration for Ultraman. So for pretty much over a half a century, Ultraman has been in some form of production pretty consistently for the last 5 decades, which is incredible to think that
Absolutely incredible.
that this show has had the longevity that it's had. And really, almost all the Toku shows, like with Sentai, with Rider, like each of them have been around for multiple decades, and just like the different generations, how they just find new ways to reinvent themselves and stay present. And there definitely have been sort of lean times, because I know with it was with Ginga, right, where they was at the verge of cancellation.
Yeah, it was so between Ultraman Max and Ultraman Ginga, there was hardly anything. You had a couple movies, like the Ultraman Zero movie, and then you had shows like Ultra 7X, but by and large, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot going on. And Subaraya was on the brink of bankruptcy, if I remember right. But then Ginga came in, and the Bandai partnership really, really saved their butts.
Yeah. And I will say, Super Eye Productions, they've always worked, within like the letter of their budget, and finding ways to work to even outside of like what they're able to do with that shoestring budget. And I think Ginga is a great example of like the modern era of them taking a very tiny budget and just like going so far with it.
Yep.
The series that I've seen, I've seen a good bit of the original Ultraman. The original series is rather long, so I'm sort of like watching it in chunks.
All of them are, though, back then. I mean, you're looking at anywhere from like 40 to 50 episodes. It's tough to get through, especially in like one sitting. If it wasn't
Yeah.
for the podcast, some of these shows would be like, I'll get back to you next year.
And plus, like, I'm not a binging type person, so like for me to just like sit and just watch several episodes in a row is a bit out of my nature. But I love the original series. I got to watch it. A friend of mine got me the Blu-ray sets for Ultra
nice.
Q and Ultraman. Great quality. There's a ton of detail, and the linear notes for the DVDs. Like I remember just like taking the little booklet out and just reading it, because like it's just it's dense with information to give you monster details, episode details about the history, and like they put a lot of effort and like care into these DVD releases, and I really appreciate that. How like I guess generous with the content they've had with Ultraman, especially.
Yeah, Chris and I will critique their grammar and typos every once in a while, but it's out of love. I mean, obviously we could just have nothing, right? And we both know that, but we're both, well, actually, he's not an English major now that I think about it, but being an English major, sometimes it's really tough. I'm like, come on, guys. Like,
It's like a run-on sentence, like 0 out of 10.
I know. It's like, seriously, I mean, I would do this for free. Just let me proofread it. I promise it would be better.
And as for I've seen a little bit of Return of Ultraman, a little bit of Taro.
Okay.
Of the newer series, I've seen all of Z. Just recently started Orb within this last week. And
nice.
I'm loving Orb. It's really interesting to see the contrast of the main character from Orb to sort of the other series like Geed or Z, because he kind of like a cool guy type hero. Like he knows what he's doing, and you have the other characters who are like they're sort of learning as the show progresses. So to see like a more seasoned character be the Ultra, it's an interesting contrast.
And that's the thing. So you see a little bit more of that in Orb Origins, because obviously it's an origin story. But yeah, I agree. So for those of you who haven't watched it, he has this big brown, like kind of like leather coat. He has this brown leather hat. He's a very suave, just composed guy. The only thing I have about Guy is every once in a while he'll have this voice that makes him sound like Kermit the Frog. And I'm like, I don't know why he does it. but I hear it and I'm like, what's going on?
I don't know if that's intentional on the actor's part, but
I don't know
to me,
either.
but to me, it is funny to see like the little cracks in his like cool guy facade.
Yeah.
Like there was a moment from an episode I watched very recently, how he's got his coat thrown over his shoulders, like "I'll see you around, kiddo." And then Naomi, the female lead, she was like, "Oh, do you want to stay for like a home cooked meal?" And he just stops and turns on a dime. It's like food, and then he just like his cool guy persona just like disappears at like a home cooked meal.
Yeah, it's a good one. I definitely enjoy Orb quite a bit.
I'm really interested to start Rubu R/B. There's a lot of different versions of how you pronounce the title on that one.
Yeah, I just go off of the fact that you have Ultraman Rosso and Ultraman Blue. So when they combine, they became Ultraman Rube. So I just go with Rube. But yeah, I've heard like 5 different ways. I'm just like, we're all talking about the same show.
Yeah, the trouble of like when you have a English title that's pronounced in Japanese, it's like you said how Belial Atrocious is like that's their way of saying it. So it's interesting. Because I also was given the DVD sets for Rubu and Geed. I've seen a little bit of Geed, and I will admit I had a bit of a harder time getting into Geed, but I think I'm finding my footing with it.
Yeah, definitely stick with that one. It's, I think, quality-wise, is one of the better new generation shows, in my opinion.
And I know with like how a lot of Geed sort of is affected by this preeminent villain character, the one that your show is named after, Belial. He plays a big role in that. And what I remember hearing Geed, there's a story really is strong as it goes on, and like I love Riku as he returns in Z to be a mentor for Hikaru.
Yeah, I think you mean Haruki.
Excuse me, Haruki. Excuse me.
I know there's so many names that are similar. You have Hikaru, Haruki, and then Ultraman Hickory, right? And it's just like,
and especially when you're like me, who's just like, oh, let me just try to watch 3 different series at once because I'm just so excited. And then like it's like a Charlie Day meme like flow chart trying to keep everybody's names in line.
Yeah, I get that.
And actually, just recently today, I bought like one of the movie sets, the Ultra Galaxy Mega Monster Battle set. I bought that one today when I was out doing my errands to have one more for the pile.
That is a fun movie. You don't really have to know much about Ultraman, and you can have a really good time with that one. It does tie in with the show that it's based off of, but again, you don't really have to know a whole lot because there's still enough to kind of like hold your hand to get through it, right? Because it really says a movie. They kind of assumed that not everybody was going to watch the show that was based on a video game. So go figure.
Yeah, they are rather generous with like letting people sort of wade into the deeper waters of the series.
Mm-hmm.
Toku is such a big part of my life. I love like sharing it with others, and I will say my friends have been very receptive to it. Like there's even a few episodes of our show AYCH where I broke down basically a Toku, a beginner's guide. I talked to my friends about Super Sentai, Kamen Rider, the Japanese Spider-Man. It's sort of like a how-to guide for like Spider-Man is a who if you out there haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. I would definitely encourage you to seek that out. It's a wild ride. But basically just sort of like a beginner's guide for those who haven't get into it, and they really enjoy themselves. So I was going to ask you.
That's awesome.
Are your friends receptive to like your Toku interests? Does your family watch Toku with you? What's that like?
Yeah. So great question. I think like most of us during the pandemic, most of our friends we talked to online. But in real life, no, I mean, it's not that they're not receptive. It's just as bad. I don't know if it sounds bad, but like, yeah, I really like tokusatsu, but it's not really like something I talk to about a lot of people, or talk about with people. I don't know, words, they're hard. Okay. I mean, they'll trust me, the people who know me, they know I like Godzilla and Ultraman, stuff like that, but it's just, it never really comes up. I do have a couple friends here and there that like Godzilla. So like, we'll talk about, Godzilla versus Kong, or I'm like, hey, you should check out Singular Point. And they're like, what's Singular Point? I'm like, have you been living under a rock? You need to watch this right now. But by and large, it's typically not something. It's just, I don't know. I don't really hang out with people like me. It's weird. But that said, with the family though, yeah, I mean, my son, like, he loves Ultraman, like, loves it. Probably, yeah, probably more than I do. And I mean, my wife, she knows who Ultraman is. I mean, she sat down and watched a few episodes. I mean, yeah, she went with me to go see Godzilla 2014. I mean, I took my son to see Godzilla vs. Kong. Heck, I took my mom to go see it because she's the one who introduced me to Godzilla, almost 30 years ago.
Just interject, my mom was kind of low-key hinting that she really wanted to see Godzilla versus Kong, and we took a group to a private screening, and she had a really good time. So
that was a funny episode. I don't remember who was talking about their dad talking the whole time, and how, like, he was talking about how if it wasn't realistic, and obviously he's joking, and I don't have everyone's voices memorized, but man, I was having a hoot during that part.
Yeah, that was Wenzel. He's talking about his dad, and they're very close. And his dad's a big military buff, and I think he was introduced Wenzel to sort of Godzilla and the like as well. And he's like, well, this and that, like all sort of like the military inaccuracies of it. It was a hoot too.
But yeah, I mean, as a family, I mean, we're pretty big into Godzilla. Like, I've got a Jake Bannon print of Godzilla on the back wall here. I mean, Jasper has his shirts and his toys and stuff. But yeah, it's just one of those things where, like, I mean, I talk to people about it. They know it's something I like, but I'm definitely more of an evangelist through the podcast than I am in real life, because when I'm around people, we usually have other things to talk about.
Yeah.
As bad as that sounds, it's just kind of, when we've kind of got out of the hell that was 2020, we're all just trying to figure out, like, how to get through, and some people just don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's very fair, but I do think it's just really cool that your family, especially your children, are like that. This is something that y'all do together. It's like,
oh yeah,
it seems kind of weird to say, like, because a lot of the fans in the West are sort of adult children, like they sort of grew up with Power Rangers and things like that. So, like, keeping that sort of whimsy alive through like these toku shows. But it's cool to see that they're actual children on this end of the world who do like watch it and and like enjoyed it just as much as the adults do.
I don't think you were wrong when you said they're adult children, though.
I mean, I didn't mean that dismissively.
Like, have
of
you
course.
been on Twitter lately?
And like, of course, I wasn't dismissive, but like, I consider myself an adult child. But sort of like,
I know.
I
just yeah, it's fandoms can be an interesting business.
Yeah,
let's put it that way. But yeah, it is interesting because, I mean, like I said, I grew up watching Godzilla. I mean, the original, I guess, Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 56 version, probably the first movie I ever remember watching.
Yeah.
I went to school. Well, first day of kindergarten, I was in my Red Ranger Jason outfit, right? I mean, it was just like, I was so pumped, and I actually made friends who, I would call friends for almost, 20 years because of that day, right?
Yeah.
So it's some form of tokusatsu or just even Godzilla adjacent stuff has always been a part of my life. Like, I can't stress that enough. But yeah, it's just kind of one of those things that I would say with most of the people I'm around, like, they'll talk about Marvel, right? So we kind of have that bridge, and then sometimes I'll interject a little bit of Ultraman and Godzilla in there. But I think with Marvel being kind of the cultural zeitgeist at the moment,
Yeah.
that's kind of what most people want to talk about when it comes to movies and stuff like that.
And I definitely feel like there's enough room in sort of the Marvel talk, because they're giant monsters and things like that. Like my friends and I were joking on our episode for Falcon and Winter Soldier that, like, we were hoping that, like, the big twist for the end of the series is that Falcon and Winter Soldier have to fight U.S. Kaiju, which is like a rather obscure character, but it feels like if they're gonna pull something crazy, that'd be a fun way to introduce that character to the larger viewing audience for Marvel.
I mean, we did get an interesting monster in Loki. I was pretty down for that.
Yeah, that is true. But on the thing, sort of like your friends knowing you as like the Toku guy, the Godzilla guy, like that's how my friends, they know me. Like, They're vaguely aware of like certain characters, like, they'll see me post stuff like, oh, that's so and so or that's somebody, and they'll get me stuff. Like my roommate, they actually got me a Ultraman Ace pop from Christmas.
Oh, awesome.
They didn't know like what it was. Oh, that's Ultraman. Pat likes that. That's going in the stocking.
Yeah. That's my life. Is if there's ever anything Godzilla related that becomes a meme, you better believe I get like this same, like I get it sent like 5 or 6 times to me, and I just want to be like, I've already seen it. I saw it months ago, but thanks, guys.
You give them the 3 laughing crying emojis, be like you saw it for the first time.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like it's the thought that counts. I appreciate y'all.
Yeah. And I will say there has been like a more recent convert, a good friend of mine, right as quarantine was quote lifting. They asked me to sort of help them to get started into Toku, and I was like, oh, my time has come. Nice. So I gave them my TED talk about where they can start, what they can watch freely and easily, and I think they started with Kamen Rider.
Okay.
I showed them a few places they could watch, because for folks who don't know, because there are currently, I would say Tubi and Pluto TV are some of the best like free platforms to really test out your interest in tokusatsu, because there's no subscription fee for those platforms, and there's a pretty good catalog of stuff they have, and it's all subtitled, and there's several series. So I think that'd be a great boon for anyone who's sort of looking to stretch their legs in like the greater tokusatsu world, because they have Sentai, they have Rider, they have Ultraman. So you have like the big 3, and you can sort of take your pick from those within those 2 platforms, I would say, and YouTube as well.
Yeah, and that actually was part of the reason why we're watching the shows we're watching. That's, you saying that reminded me, because we didn't want to talk about some of the more popular shows that are, you have to stream them illegally to watch them. So all the shows we're discussing have been Mill Creek releases, right? And that's our goal again, is if you can't watch it free, which most of them you can, then at least you could go on Barnes and Noble or Best Buy or somewhere like that to purchase the movies and the shows, and an entire series is like anywhere from $20 to $30. It's really not a bad deal at all, especially when some of these series, maybe it's 25 episodes, but it comes with a movie.
Yeah.
So you're getting quite a bit of bang for your buck. So yeah, I mean, it's an amazing time to be a tokusatsu fan, because like you said, like Shout Factory alone has a large amount, of free shows you can watch, whether it's even like Super Sentai Zoo Ranger, right? The show that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is based off of, which is incredibly darker than obviously what we got here in the States.
For sure.
I started watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is intense.
Yeah, it really is sort of funny seeing the original version and then comparing it to your childhood memories, because on a recent episode of our show, we were talking about, my roommate and I, about Big Bad Beetleborgs and how it is so vastly different from the Japanese property, because the Japanese property is, oh, these are like armored combatants and like cybernetic insect like armor, and then the American version is like these kids stumble into a haunted house with a Liberace ghost genie that lives in the pipe organ and gives them comic book powers, and just like it's insane. And what's even funnier is when you have the American adaptation go back to Japan to be subbed, and like it finding their fans there, like how Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, the American adaptation of the Kamen Rider Ryuki, it went to Japan and it was pretty successful from what I hear.
Huh. Interesting.
We talked earlier, like 2021 is sort of like this boon year for tokusatsu, was just like this outpouring of like streaming releases from Japan for Ultraman, and with Super Riot YouTube channel putting up the new series and sort of like live streaming the current series. Because when Z was new last year, they played every episode weekly, and now with Trigger, it started, the second episode came out at the time of this recording, and it's sort of, I'm getting that charge again, because like, oh boy, it's brand new Ultraman every Friday night.
Yeah, within 48 hours, the first episode had, crap, I already forgot, a lot of downloads. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Well, not downloads, streams, excuse me.
Yeah. And, well, I figured while we're on the subject, why don't we talk about the new Ultraman? Of the 2 episodes that you've seen, what are your first impressions of Ultraman Trigger?
First impressions is I'm glad I have been, quote unquote, legally watching it on a site that will not be named, YouTube. Because again, Ultraman's really good at not like requiring you to watch previous shows to understand it. But I will say there are already a lot of things that if I had not started watching Tiga, I think that's what I meant to say, Tiga. It's like I said, it's been a long day. So if I hadn't started watching that, then there's probably a few things now I wouldn't have appreciated as much. But by and large, it's really interesting that they decided to take such a popular show, being Tiga, and really kind of doing like it's almost like a soft reboot for the current generation of fans. And I don't know if it's going to be something that just does away. Like it's hard to see how they're going to make this, like what they're going to do with it. Is it going to be like a complete reboot? Is it going to be something that they both exist? I mean, I don't really care. I'm just happy to be along for the ride.
Yeah.
So that intrigue is interesting. I really like the fact that the ultra host or the protagonist is very, his motivation is to make people smile, right? I mean, I know that sounds cheesy, but especially after what's happened the past year, I'm like, that's a very admirable desire. One of the things I love is in the team that helps support Ultraman, right? Even though they exist outside of him, that's obviously their job, or they desire to help Ultraman defeat the monsters. Is two of the actors that you'll see there. I don't have their names in front of me, but the guy that always talks about working out, and then you have the girl that directs or pilots the drone. So they both were characters in previous Ultraman shows. And I think it's just because they were such good actors that were underutilized. One was in Ginga S for like 2 or 3 episodes. The other was in Geed, as a shopkeeper here and there. But they're both phenomenal actors, so it's good to see them back. And yeah, it's even with the main, not the main character, the head of the Shizuma Foundation. You can tell there's more going on with him than meets the eye. It's just already, it's so intriguing, and it's yeah, I really think it's off to a good start. Like any show, it has to stick the landing. But I think having the director who has worked on several other shows, I think it's in capable hands. I'm not necessarily a fan of the CG personally, but I'll deal with it. I mean, this episode was better than the first one. But what about you? What are your thoughts so far?
I really enjoyed that first episode and this week's episode as well. And like you said, this is sort of like a soft reboot, reimagining of Ultraman Tiga, which came out, correct me if I'm wrong, in the early 2000s.
It was in the 90s, yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of basically it's a re-examination of that series for a new generation. Like it's literally the title, Ultraman Trigger, New Generation Tiga, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting that this series starts on Mars and has this young man who wants to be a botanist, that he's genetically crafting this special flower that he hopes will bring happiness to the world around him, and how he sort of gets involved with this 30 million year old space plot, and with this evil Ultra Woman. Her name was Chimera.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce it.
Because I've seen Chimera, I've seen Camilla. Basically,
Yeah.
she's up to no good, and she seeks a monster on the Dome Mars City. And I thought there was a really interesting, I guess, fight, because you have this monster. He comes in and wrecks house, and they had a very interesting camera movement when they were sort of like following the monster and Ultraman as they're fighting. But then when Camilla, we'll say, shows up, there's like it turned into like this like mud wrestling sort of, I guess, fight, and which I haven't really seen it from my sort of foray into Ultraman yet. But I always appreciate the level of details that goes into the sets and the miniature making, and this was just a very different environment for what I'm used to in Ultraman so far.
Let's just say there's one other show that has a similar fight scene as that. It's also by the same director. So the director is Koichi Sakamoto. So he got his start by working with Power Rangers, actually, as working in the stunt element. I don't remember if he's like a stunt director or whatever the case may be. But he then started directing Ultraman. So like he did Ultraman Ginga S. He did some stuff in Ultraman X, but he was the main director for Ultraman Geed. So having him on for Ultraman Trigger, which he also was the director for the Ultraman Belial movie too, if I remember right. Yes, so Ultra Galaxy. But yeah, so having him as the director for this, it's definitely going to be a lot more action driven. There's going to be a lot more attention to the camera work with the fighting, which I'm all about.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think this most recent episode, they actually did a really good job of blending the CGI and the suitmation. I thought there's a couple CGI spots that are kind of dodgy, but then when you get these overhead shots and it's going back and forth, it worked really well in this episode.
And I will say, like, for like non-Toku fans, like there is going to be like some hit or miss like CG, but I never felt like, oh, this is pulling me out. And if anything, like
not at all.
anything, I kind of feel like I enjoy the charm of the CG being a little weak in places, because it's like with the old show from the Showa era, you have like
Exactly
the miniatures and the props, so like there's a certain level of charm to like the I guess the quote low grade, even though there's a great amount of skill that's dedicated to even quote the lowest grade of special effects. So I appreciate that. And like coming off of like Z, when I feel like there were some really impressive like ultra fights in Z, and I'm really excited to see. Like there was a moment in the second episode where the drone pilot, she was flying in the air and like the monster tentacles were like chasing her. I thought that was a great sequence.
Oh, it looked great. Yeah, that scene in particular is great. It was it's mostly, in my opinion, like when you have the Guimara, I don't remember how to pronounce it, but the monster in that episode.
Yes.
There was just one shot where it was just him doing something. I was like, eh. But this is where you get into this whole like, I'm more forgiving when it comes to shows and special effects, whether it's the miniature work or the special or the CGI, because the budget they have has to be split into each episode.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if it's a movie, in my opinion, I'm like, you need to do it right.
Yeah.
And you look at the Godzilla movies, and obviously like their special effects were by and large phenomenal. You look at the Ultraman Zero movie, the CGI in that movie is actually even really good because it's all focused into one thing, right? You're looking at the box office money and all this stuff. So it's the reason why if I watch a Marvel movie, I may pick apart the CGI more than I would if I'm watching Loki or, Falcon and Winter Soldier, stuff like that. That's just, in my opinion, I feel like the budget numbers are just so different that you can't expect the same level each time.
Yeah.
But then we're going to get the Lord of the Rings movie or the Lord of the Rings show. I'm going to expect top of the line there because the budget for that is just astronomical. So it better look good.
Yeah, it was like
I'm going to be super critical.
Multi hundreds of millions of dollars per episodes.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I don't remember what it was. I just remember looking at it and being like, yes, please.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of hard to remember a time when like what was it? Rome was like so expensive it got canceled, and now it's just like Lord of the Rings. Here's $550 million an episode. Go crazy.
Yeah, it's
it's insane how just like 10 years a difference would make.
Yeah. Amazon, give me $500 million to make an episode. I promise it'll be good, and I promise you'll see me again.
I definitely won't disappear into the wilds with this. But just some, I guess, like a few other miscellaneous Ultraman stuff. How do you feel about the Ultraman comics that are being put out by Marvel right now?
Good question. So, we just released an episode about it, and I'm not a big comic guy. Not that, like, I think the medium's great. It's just for me, you're talking about a lot of Ultraman series. I'm like, I don't know how anyone keeps up with comics. I mean, every character's been rebooted 52 times, and it's just, it's just such a cluster. But I think what Kyle Higgins and Matt Groom are doing, it's a very interesting story. So far, I think it's done well. The critique I have is that it seems like comics nowadays are being written to be like a collected in a trade.
Oh, definitely.
So I am not loving it as much if I go issue by issue. But then when I sit down and I read it all together, I'm like, oh, this is great, because it just feels like a really big story that's cohesive. But issue to issue, I'm just like, the momentum just waxes and wanes, and it doesn't work for me as well. So if you're going to get into it, and I think you should, just pick up the trade. Like, I don't think anyone's missing out by not buying each issue, but I also want to see this keep happening. Like, they just announced next year's comic series is going to be Ultra 7, so I'm excited about that. So I will keep buying the issues, but I also will reread them as a trade to kind of express my collected opinion.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
Because I definitely do agree. As someone who does read comics very regularly, it is even more of a hurdle, I would say, even than like just international property that diving into. I feel like at least with a lot of like manga or Japanese shows that like I feel like there's a more clear starting point, and it's more collective, like it's to itself. Whereas if you want to start reading Spider-Man, where do you go? Because like all these different versions, all these different books. So I understand the trepidation of like starting comics if you aren't already into it. But as for the series itself, I will say I really like the first series, because there's two Ultraman books that run now. There's Rise of Ultraman and there's Trials Ultraman, the current ongoing book. And I really say that very first issue, I think, is like, it was fantastic. It was probably my favorite issue of the series so far. And I liked the first run overall. The second run, it feels a lot slower to me, and it's definitely more dialogue driven. It's not
absolutely
bad, but I definitely feel like this will flow better as a trade, because month to month I'm kind of feeling like, well, did anything happen almost?
Yeah, I know. And that's what's tough is, I'm not really into manga either, but with like the Ultraman manga, I'll get it from my library. And at least with that, you have however many chapters in a single volume. So it feels like I have to wait longer, but it feels like more rewarding when I'm done. But I would probably feel the same way if I just read chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's just tough. I mean, it's hard to, in my opinion, I don't really know the right way to critique it. But yeah, I think the first Rise of Ultraman has been more enjoyable so far. I like some of the ideas they're doing with Trials, but it's just one of those things where I want to see if they're going to stick the landing. I'm a little bummed that we haven't got more of the Ultra Q side story that we got with the first series. I'm like, I thought that was a really compelling or interesting story, and I know they've kind of done a little bit of hints here and there. I just wish we could see more of that.
Exactly. So I'm definitely taking a wait and see, and then I'd love to see this continue, this partnership that Super Mario has with Marvel, because I would love for Ultraman to gain a wider audience and just to see like a different perspective on it, because I've seen a few Ultra series so far, and like I kind of know what the Japanese sort of feeling for it is in some regards, but to have like a different interpretation of it is always interesting. And on that different interpretation, have you heard of this series called Ultra Mega that's been coming out this year as a comic?
I've heard of it. I heard it's pretty gruesome.
That's a bit of an understatement, but I would say it is a different interpretation of Ultraman. It's a very dark, horror-themed, gruesome series, and I know that it's definitely not going to be everyone's taste because it's just sort of the content, but in terms of just sort of like action and like monster fighting, this is sort of like wet my whistle in place of the the ongoing
I
Ultraman
haven't
series.
heard anyone say "wet their whistle" in such a long time. Like, I just want to give you props for that. It's just such a underused phrase.
Well, thank you for that. But Ultra Mega, if you have, I would say the stomach for it. If you are sort of not put off by its like visceral violence, I would say looking into it because it's a very fast paced series. It's very like content rich. I would say where in some places the Ultraman Marvel comic feels like it's treading water at times. It moves really quickly and everything sort of like it's feel very quickly building to something. Even though I know a more violent, gruesome Ultraman may not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's and just in terms of a different perspective on this idea for the character, I think it's an interesting sort of it has an interesting place in the overall world of like toku and giant monster genre.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm looking into it now. It looks like it's on Image Comics, which I know one of Kyle Higgins' other comics is on Image as well. It's Radiant Black, I believe.
I had
that-
the first
is that
issue of it.
Image?
I almost want to say Radiant Black is Boom, but that's Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Which I'm a big fan of the Power Rangers comic. I've been reading it since it started.
Yeah, Radiant Black is Image.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I did want to get into Radiant Black. I only got the first issue, and my local comic book store they're missing the next one, so they have to wait for that issue to come in.
Oh, gotcha.
So, but I was intrigued by it. Basically, if anything resembles like Sentai or Rider Ultraman, you automatically have my attention because like because that's how big of a mark I am for the genre. So, for good, bad, or indifferent, like I'll always at least check it out for whatever it may be. But I was going to ask before we wrap up tonight, just sort of any other Toku interests that you have that you're watching right now, sort of round out the bigger Toku picture. Could we focus on Ultraman today? Obviously, that's not going to be the sole sort of interest you have in the genre.
Yeah. So to be honest, I don't with watching a show regularly for a podcast, I don't really watch a whole lot. So I've been watching, just outside of Toku, to be honest. I've been watching Loki, but that's done. There's a quite irreverent show I just finished called I Think You Should Leave. It is an amazing, amazing skit show. Yeah, just absolutely incredible.
The boys in the show, they love Colton Winslow. They love I Think You Should Leave. They've been desperately trying to get us together to watch that.
They think I'm just some dumb hick. Yeah, so it's I don't really watch a whole lot. I mean, like I said, Loki, been watching Ultraman Tiga every once in a while. Godzilla Singular Point, that's not really Toku, but I'm rewatching that with my son. I was watching it quote unquote legally while it was airing in Japan a few days after. But yeah, to be honest, I mean, I just don't really watch a whole lot these days. I do a lot more reading these days, to be honest. So,
and there's nothing wrong with that. As someone who's trying to get back into reading, I have a couple books set aside to help me ease back in because I love to read. It's just I developed this issue where no matter whether or not I find the book is compelling or not, I always fall asleep. Like even with it really interesting ones, like I'm just got to a point where I just get comfortable reading and then I just zonk out. It's a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say I'm almost done with Singular Point. I've watched it too. I'm really enjoying it. Although like all the quote science just like it just goes one ear out the other. It just sounds like gobbledygook.
Yep.
It's like this is very made up. It's very real sounding, but incredibly fake, and it all sounds like gibberish.
Yeah, that I know some people are really turned off by that. It's one of those things where I'm like, okay, so weird fictional science is enough to turn you off, but not watching a movie about giant monsters terrorizing the world, like that takes you out, but not I don't know. People just standards and whatever. So I honestly think it's some of the best Godzilla we've gotten in a very long time just because of how unique it is. I think it's a good fresh take on it. I love the characters. Once you get to the end, it all ties in really well in my opinion. But yeah, it's just it's one of those things where I understand why people don't like it. And I'm also of the opinion that if you don't like something, you don't have to shout about it on Twitter. But hey, what do I know?
Yeah.
I got off of that site.
Yeah. And like, I do appreciate y'all's commitment to being like a positive respite for the fandom. Again, like, because like with any fandom, there's going to be like clamor and clashing and negativity, and I always appreciate when there's positivity and camaraderie. Like, I have a good friend who does a Star Wars show, and you can imagine the vitriol for that fandom. But like
that was our first podcast with Star Wars.
Oh yeah, so so is Belial your third show?
Yeah, so Chris is actually a huge Star Wars fan. Not the obnoxious kind of Star Wars fan, but yeah, that's where we started. It was 1001 Jeddah Nights, and unfortunately, some of our episodes aren't online anymore. But we only probably did 6 or 7 episodes there. That was back in 2017.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we started Kaiju Apostle in 2019. So I've done 3 podcasts, and they're always with Chris. So that's kind of, he's my ride or die.
Oh, that's awesome. Because with my guys, we started in 2017 with All You Can Hear. And
yeah, I saw you guys have almost 300 episodes.
No, yeah, we're nothing if not prolific. And then in 2020, the founder, AYCH, they stepped away, and I sort of took the reins, and I've been sort of guiding this very rickety train ever since. And we recently had our spin-off show, Caging Greatness, where we talk about Nicolas Cage movies with my good friend and,
that's amazing,
and owner of a local comic store, Justin. He's like, I would say, the biggest Nicolas Cage fan in Central Alabama.
Who also loves Godzilla. Nicolas Cage is a huge Godzilla fan.
Very big fan. And like, I do appreciate just sort of the Venn diagram of all the, like, we even had a episode on Cage of Greatness. Once a month, we do like a non-Cage episode, generally, where we talk about anything. And I chose for my birthday to talk about Guyver, which is a American adaptation of the Japanese Toku series, Guyver. There's a little bit of Toku in all the AYCH programs.
Do you want to know a fun fact about Guyver?
Oh, what's that?
So actually, Koichi Sakamoto, he did a stunt role in 1994's Guyver Dark Hero.
That was the one we talked about.
Okay, there we go. He was the stunt for Sakai.
And the director, Stephen Wang, he was a director for Power Rangers, for Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. So like, it's he's very much dyed in the wool.
That's awesome.
I would suggest watching Guyver Dark Hero. It's very cheesy, but the action and monster effects are very much legit.
Yeah, I can live with that.
Which is very part of the course for Toku in general, I would say. But I just remembered there was one more thing I want to talk to you about, and that was, you talked about getting burnt out. And like, for a show that focuses so specifically, what is your sort of way to combat that? Because with us, like, we're a variety show. We kind of do everything. But with someone that focuses on one particular subject, how do you keep that fire burning to continue on with this particular subject?
So slightly serious, slightly joking answer, medication. I got on medication last year, and that helped everything quite a bit. But in all seriousness, I think it's going back and forth between the different eras of the show, right? So when we did Kaiju Apostle podcast, we started in the beginning, and we were moving progressively on and on and on and on. So it was a lot of the same stuff, which is fine. But again, not to disparage the 90s films, they're fun for what they are. But I'm just like, I knew what was coming, and I felt like it was accurate to say the best days were behind us. And there wasn't, for our approach for our show, which was to take a theological analysis of these films, there wasn't a lot moving forward. Whereas where we're at now, our emphasis isn't on deep dives. We can do that when we want to. Our emphasis now is just having fun.
Yeah.
And when we're going from the 60s and we're going to 2013, and then we're, it's like, it's just back and forth to keep everything fresh. So that's really kind of where we're at. And I think for anyone who's interested in tokusatsu, I think it's fine, to watch the era that you like. But if you don't want to get burned out, either A, kind of spread it out and vary it up, but also like, don't consume so much. Like, it's okay to not like everything. It's okay to not watch everything. Like, that's from a personal standpoint, like, that's just something I've had to learn, where like just because a new show comes out doesn't mean you have to watch it immediately, doesn't mean you have to binge it. I have my moments of binging, not gonna lie. Like even with I Think You Should Leave, it's 15 minutes per episode. Yeah, I sat down and watched 3 or 4 of them in one sitting, whatever. But with like Godzilla Singular Point, I would watch it week after week. With Dyna Xenon, I'd watch it week after week. And I enjoy that more personally. So a good way to not burn out is also don't binge.
I definitely can echo that sentiment. Like, even though my friends just like harangue me for like, what do you mean you haven't seen all Loki, or what do you mean you haven't seen all Falcon Winter Soldier? Like, I'm taking a more measured approach to it. Like, it's not going anywhere, and plus, like, I don't know, it kind of helps to feel like you're taking it at your own pace. You're not like, you know, like just weird societal pressure to like be like to watch it like at midnight and then like know everything about it and say everything about it online. It's like, you know, my life goes at a different pace. Like, I can't it's be expected to acquiesce to like, you know, this never ending like stream of like pop culture conversation and everything. So like, you know, kind of going against the stream I think would help, and sort of realizing just because you have something in front of you doesn't mean you have to eat it, you know, like that sort of like idea. And plus, to me, like, I feel like it feels like it means more taking like a slower approach to it. If I just eat it all at once, it kind of feels like it just one in and out the other, like it doesn't like stick.
Literally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it though. Like in any other context, when is binging a good thing?
Yeah.
It is not. It's actually a bad thing. It's a harmful thing. So TV is not any different. I don't think so, at least. But again, I have my moments. I'll confess that. But yeah, I think if you don't want to burn out, that's a really easy way to do it, is just don't watch it all at once.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay.
Like you said, it's like bury it up and sort of like take your time with it. Like, you're not on anyone's schedule but your own.
Yep.
But I think that's about all I had for tonight. I want to thank you so much, David, for sitting down with me and talking. It was a long time coming, and
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate it.
and it's just a lot of fun to speak with a fellow Toku fan, a fellow Ultraman fan. You and Chris, you do a great job on your show. I'm catching back up with it. I enjoy every episode I'm listening to. Y'all do a great job over there.
That means a lot. Thank you so much.
So as we're wrapping up, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, where they can listen to you, and what's the best way to reach out to y'all?
Yeah, so again, we are Saved by the Belial, an Atrocious Ultraman podcast. Again, the benefit of our show, I say benefit, like, God, I'm still in a sales mindset. So the thing I feel like that sets our show apart is it's catered and geared for people who want to experience Ultraman for the first time. Right, so we just do, 10 episodes each episode. So it gives you a chance to go on. You can watch the show at your own pace, and when you're done with those episodes, then you can listen to ours. Right, we're not here to try to like take up all of your time, because trust me, we know there's better uses of your time than listening to us. So if you want to listen to us, I mean, we're on every major podcasting platform you can think of. The easiest where I would suggest people to go is just www.atrocious, or atrocious, however you want to pronounce it, pod.com. So ATROCIOUSPOD.com. So if you go there, the front page that you'll see, it has all of our episodes on like an Apple Podcast playlist. But one of the things you can do is you can click on this link up top that says where to watch. So as we go through each show, we will put links where you can watch all of these different shows. So currently we've gone through Ultraman, we've gone through Ultraman Ginga and Ginga S, and whenever this episode goes live, we'll probably have an episode or two of Ultra 7. So all of those shows you can now watch online for free. So we have links to that where you could click and watch. So it's not something you have to sink some money into, to be able to take part of the conversation. But apart from that, if you want to reach out, we do have a contact page on there. We do use Twitter, but that's more for just posting dumb memes and for letting people know that we have a new episode. Like, we actually don't even log in to reply. I just use all of it via third-party website, because I actually don't use any social media at all. So it's one of those things, like, I'll post something and I'm done. So if you want to reach out to us, email is definitely the best way, which again, you can find it on our website.
And I will have links to all the different ways you can find Belial.
Well, thank you.
In the description of our episode. So we'll definitely give y'all the signal boost on our end to make sure anybody listening today, they can go and find y'all and and just sort of keep the conversation going and just about Toku. So once again, thank you, David, for joining us. And
Absolutely. Thank you.
thank you all for listening today. You can follow us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Google Podcasts, Overcast, and Spotify. Be sure to like, rate, review, subscribe. And all those platforms helps us out, keeps us visible, puts us in front of you listeners, and we always appreciate you when you do it. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram at AYCH Podcast, Letterboxd and Facebook at All You Can Hear, Twitch at twitch.tv/All You Can Hear, and YouTube as well at All You Can Hear. And lastly, you can follow me, Patrick, on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at John Lost His Name, my art on Facebook at John Lost His Name Art. Big thank you for listening today. Big thank you for David for joining us. And hopefully this won't be the last time we speak, but because I had a great time getting to know you and just talking about Toku today. So hopefully we will be talking again in the future.
Let's do it.
Thank you, and y'all have a great night. Take care.